Trump versus Harvard, and also the people versus the university elite. Some of their biggest crimes. Now, President Trump is doing his normal thing and having a fascinating battle with Harvard University. He's recently withdrawn the right of Harvard to host foreign students after previously suspending government funds for some of their research. Trump's administration cited Harvard's racist and sexist enrollment practices, DEI, and also anti-Semitism. Now, one feels instinctively to cheer him on against the university. But there are actually two sides to that argument. First, we would like to have an independent university system which is not interfered with by politicians. But on the other hand, the government puts a lot of money into universities, and a government has a right to say how that money might be spent. And also, how bad must a university get before a government really has to interfere? Especially as so many of the universities have all gone bad, at least in the humanities. It's not so much of a problem in engineering or medicine, but in education, which we'll talk about later, and the humanities, it seems the only difference between the universities is just the degree of awfulness. Now, in a sense, Trump's problem with the universities is only the tip of the iceberg. So I thought I'd give my list of the top problems with the universities, especially Australian universities, which have committed some of the most egregious crimes. And I'm not even going to talk about academic freedom, which has been a personal bugbear of mine. So here we go. And at number 7, we have visa scamming. This is particular to Australia, but also applies to UK and Canada, and to some extent Australia. But Australia and Canada have more foreign students than any other country when you normalise it to the country population. So, for example, in this table, we see that Australia has half as many students as America, but America has 10 times the population. Now, do you think that the quality of Australian universities is the reason that we're attracting so many students? It's not like we have a huge tech sector like America, which needs the bright young minds. Or is it the lure of permanent residency and citizenship coming into play? Now, as it turns out, even the Google AI agrees. It says, yes, a pathway to permanent residency is a significant factor in attracting international students, particularly to countries like Australia. While not all students successfully transition to permanent residency, the possibility of it is a strong incentive for many students to choose countries for their studies. Now, according to Universities of Australia, which I admit is not the most reliable organisation to source your data from, only 16% of foreign students actually achieve permanent residency. It's likely that many of the students are given false hope with the connivance of the universities and other organisations. So look at this comment in a recent report by the Grattan Institute. Australia offers international students generous rights to stay and work here after they graduate, which gives false hope to thousands of graduates who will never gain permanent residency. Many international students stay in Australia in temporary visas once they graduate, but struggle to pursue their chosen career. Only half secure full-time employment. Most work in low-skilled jobs and earn less than $53,000 a year. Many international graduates are also stuck in visa limbo. Less than 1/3 of temporary graduate visa holders now transition to permanent residency when their visas expire, down from 2/3 in 2014. 1 in 3 graduates return to further study, mostly in cheaper vocational courses to prolong their stay in Australia. All right, in other words, the universities get their fee partly on the basis of some overseas student will get PR or their anticipation, but then the student ends up staying working in some low-paid job. Now, that may well suit the students just fine, but why do they have to hand over their hard-earned cash to one of our thieving universities in order to do this? Why are the universities the dirty middleman using visa scams to make money? And number 6, we have lying about the economic benefit to Australia of overseas students, and a big lie too. The uni sector often claimed that overseas students is Australia's 4th biggest export earner after coal, gas, and I guess iron ore. But they massively fudged these figures. So instead of being 48 billion, it's only 31 billion. Still a big number, but exaggerated by 16 billion plus, an error of only 50%. They do this to stop the governments cutting the student visa quotas and thus ending their Ponzi scheme. The main problem is that they exaggerate how much money students bring into the country for living expenses. Now, sure, some have rich parents and they pay the living expenses and the money goes to Australia. But a huge percentage of the students work while studying, earning money in Australia and then spending it in Australia. Now, that's a good thing, but it's not an export. The unis scammed this figure. Even worse, quite a few of those students will send some of their Aussie earnings back home, and good on them. But that's actually then the opposite of an export. Now, many students just regard the uni fees as a form of taxation. It needs to be paid so that they can get a job in Australia. I say, good on those students, they work hard. But why should the universities and the other education providers be creaming this money off the top and then lying about the supposed economic benefit to Australia? And at number 5, we have lack of diversity. Actually, I think this should probably be number 1, but anyway, in politically correct circles, diversity is strength. It's one of those mantras, isn't it? You've got to have your quota of women or gay Asian whales, but the diversity that matters, which is the diversity of our ideas, well, that doesn't count, does it? It turns out that university academics are massively overrepresented by the left wing and the extreme left. The percentage of academics who are conservative is down probably at around 10%. Those with the left-wing bent are up around 60%, and probably most of the conservatives are teaching in engineering and medicine. So the slant towards the left is far worse in the humanities. Now, in this American survey, English professors were almost certainly not conservative, and the social sciences was almost equally skewed. Now, of course, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having some left-wing or even extreme left professors. But the problem is that the bias is utterly overwhelming, and that affects almost everything at the university. That's why maybe this should have been number 1, but we'll see that later. Number 4, and this is one that a lot of people don't know about: Kangaroo Court disciplinary procedures against their own students. Now, woe betide any student who gets on the wrong side of the woke world of a university. Universities have their own disciplinary procedures which can and have ruined students' lives. Perhaps the worst example in Australia and the US has been highlighted by Bettina Arndt, who has shown that sexual assault, rather than being dealt with by police, or allegations of sexual assault, rather than being handled by the police and the court, were instead dealt with by internal university kangaroo courts, where there was no presumption of innocence and the rules of permissible evidence. So there have been examples where allegations have been made against the students whose life has then been ruined because the university has found them guilty. This has been a huge problem in the US, but even here in Australia, there's been horrible cases. One ended up in court, and this is what the judge, Justice Lyons, had to say about the university kangaroo courts. The university policy and procedures documents make it clear that the university only has jurisdiction in relation to criminal acts of sexual nature where the alleged offence is proven, essentially by a proper court. In my view, that jurisdiction is limited to determining what penalty is to be imposed as a consequence of a finding that the alleged offence is proven. It would indeed be a startling result if a committee comprised of academics and students who are not required to have any legal training could decide allegations of the most serious kind without any of the protections of criminal law. Basically, for criminal matters like this, the university has no right to pretend that it's a court and then ruin students' lives. And at number 3, we have cheating and standards reduction. You could talk all day about this one. The academic standards in many degrees are now pretty woeful. The only prerequisite for some degrees is you've sort of got to have a pulse. And there have been many scandalous examples of how lowering standards has been done to accept overseas students. For example, a few years ago, Professor Gerd Schroeder-Turk made some public comments about Murdoch University lowering English proficiency standards. He said the unis were effectively exploiting the students in pursuit of revenue. And guess what Murdoch University did? They sued him. Fortunately, there was such an outcry that the university was forced to back down, fortunately for the outcry. But nowadays, universities also do other things like the overuse of long writing assignments. Now, this means that cheating is rampant. So, for example, if you type into Google the words "do my assignment," you'll see that you'll get dozens of companies who will help you cheat. Now, this happens in schools too, but at least there's a proper external exam. But so many of the university courses are effectively 100% by assignments, so cheating is rampant. The universities pretend to be doing something about it, but they know that it's a massive problem and they effectively just ignore it and pay lip service to the solution. And at number two, we have anti-Semitism. Now, this is one where Trump has got very upset with the university, and there's so much that could be said on this. Now, in my opinion, the worst part of this relates back to number five, which we mentioned previously, which is that so many of the academics in the humanities subjects are extreme left, which means they utterly hate Israel and anybody who supports Israel. Now, the number of incidents where Jewish students have been shouted at and harassed is just utterly shocking. Can you imagine if that sort of behaviour occurred against black students or Muslim students in an organised way, or that many of the faculty were actually closet KKK members? There would be an outrage, and rightly so. Now, some have been arguing that Jewish people are playing the anti-Semitism card too often and that legitimate criticism of Israel is categorized as anti-Semitism. And there are some instances of this. But to deny that many parts of universities are acutely anti-Semitic places is to deny a horrible reality, especially in the big city universities. It's not so much a problem up here, say at James Cook University, but in the big cities, it's a problem. And that brings me to the number one crime, where the universities can and actually do real evil stuff. Now, some of you will be wondering, well, what's worse than the anti-Semitism? So this must be bad. But it's all related back to the same problem, which is the fact that universities are dominated by the left and the far left, and there's no diversity of ideas. So the final crime is widespread indoctrination of our young people. And I'm going to focus in a moment on teacher education because that's where it matters the most. We give our students to these academics who, many of them, or at least a good proportion of them, will attempt to brainwash our students. They feel, in fact, that it's their duty. They don't see it as brainwashing and they think they're on the side of the angels and they must push their extreme left philosophies. Almost every one of them is against Western civilization. You know, the story Australia was built on the bodies of dead Aboriginals, that it's an illegitimate country, that capitalism is bad, that China can do no wrong, that they've got to train the youth to be climate warriors. You know the story. And they also find no fault with cultures overseas which are massively anti-women and anti-LGBTQ, the sort of thing that if this occurred in our country, they would be outraged. The anti-Semitism, to some extent, is just this anti-West, anti-us thing. But actually, in most degrees, it doesn't matter too much. Does it really matter if a sociologist has been trained to be a woke twat? Yeah, it does to some extent, but the real damage is done in teacher training. The universities decide effectively who will become teachers, and the teachers then teach our children. Control education, and you control the political future of a country. Now, before I go on, I should say that many of the students come through the university indoctrination process quite well. It's quite remarkable, but a lot of damage is still done. Now, I've done a whole video on the trouble with teacher education. Fundamentally, the woke ideology is just turned up to 11. All the Indigenous stuff goes crazy. For a Bachelor of Education, it takes 4 years of this stuff. And there's nowhere near enough of the good stuff like proper practical training experience. For those who are ready with a degree, it then takes 2 years to get a postgraduate degree to teach. Just a few years ago, it was just 1 extra year. Now imagine you're a conservatively minded student who wants to be a teacher. Are you going to be able to get through so many years of torture, having to pretend to be a fully signed up woke warrior. So, by effectively selecting our teachers, the universities are doing us great harm. This is where they actually control our future. So, coming back to Trump, and as I said, I have some reservations about how he's going about dealing with Harvard. And in a sense, picking on one university, while it must be great fun, is missing the point of the far wider problems with the universities right across the Western world. In fact, until we fix the problems with the universities, a great many of our societal problems will fester and just get worse. Now, this may seem very depressing, but in a future video, I'll make some concrete suggestions of how I think we can fix the universities.